So now we're on day 2 of food webs. So if you're still confused about food webs, you can always go back and watch your Edpuzzle multiple times, but we're gonna move on to some small detailed things and an overview of all of the ecology stuff that we've learned so that you can get ready for the quiz that you'll be taking afterwards. So again, first things first, make sure that you take your attendance by doing your attendance form. Second thing, you're gonna be on this video, obviously. If you need to do your attendance, obviously you can pause and then go back and do your attendance. And then you're going to do your interactive journal, finish that up, make sure you turn it in when you're done, do your exit ticket for today's lesson, and then lastly, there is a quiz, and in the instructions on the Google Post, it tells you how to get to it. All right, so the first things I'm gonna ask you are for the do not questions. Which consumer level eats producers or autotrophs? That's right, the answer is primary consumers, because they're the first ones eating something. Producers don't eat anything. Second thing is, list the 3 types of consumers. The answer is carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores, the 3 kinds of organisms that eat things, whether it's meat or plants or both. Third, what % of energy travels up each trophic level when an organism gets consumed? The answer is 10% of the energy, right? Remember, it's called the 10% rule. Students will be able to create a food chain. We're not actually going to ask you to create one, but it's kind of good for you to know how to create one. So you should know the levels, what numbers each organism is in a level for the trophic levels in a food web, and you should be able to tell like where the energy is going based on what the arrow is pointing towards. So we're going to go over some questions that you might be encountering that are similar to what are on your quiz, and we'll see how you guys do in them so that then you can take your quiz and do well on it. So what do we call an organism that only eats meat? We just went over this in the do now. The answer is a carnivore. What happens to available energy as we move up an ecological pyramid? Does it increase or decrease? It decreases, right? It decreases by 90% because only 10% moves up. What is the type of relationship when one organism benefits and the other is unaffected? That's commensalism, right? Because one is benefiting and then one is neutral. So it's the smiley face and the neutral face. What is special about producers compared to consumers? The answer is they make their own food. Remember, the other name for them is autotroph. What type of consumer is a grasshopper? Is it an herbivore, an omnivore, or a carnivore? That's right, it's in the name. It eats grass, so it's an herbivore. What is the scientific name for the role an organism plays in its environment? It's a niche. What is the name for a relationship when both organisms benefit? That would be mutualism. What do we call organisms that break down dead or decaying matter? Decomposers, right? For example, bacteria and fungi. Give an example of a parasite. Ticks, tapeworms. The longest tapeworm ever found in a human intestine was 60 feet long. That's crazy. That's like part of a football field length. What do we call an organism that cannot produce its own food? Remember, the ones that can produce its own food are called autotrophs. So who's the one that cannot? Heterotrophs. Next question. What is the vocabulary term for the maximum population that can live in a certain area? That would be the carrying capacity. Remember, I showed you the picture of the bucket being overfilled. That bucket size is the carrying capacity. What are the 4 major players or roles in an ecosystem? It's a little tricky. It's having consumers, autotrophs, decomposers, and what would the last one be? It's the source of energy, right? The sun. The sun is the most important because all the energy comes from the sun. Okay, so the autotrophs have to pull the energy from somewhere to have energy, and then the consumers eat that energy, and then the decomposers break down the consumers once they're dying, right? But the sun is a major player because that's the source of all the energy inside of an ecosystem and a food web. What do we call the relationship when one organism feeds on another organism? So it kills and eats it. It's called predation. Where is the least available energy on an ecological pyramid? Is it the top or the bottom? The answer is the top, right? Because you start at 100 and then you go 10%, 1%, 0.1, and get smaller and smaller as you go up. What is an omnivore? That's right. It's an animal that eats both meat and plants. What type of symbiotic relationship do birds and flowers have? Think about it. If the bird is, for example, let's think about a hummingbird, right? The hummingbird drinks the nectar from the flowers, and the flowers' pollen gets onto the hummingbird's body. And so when the hummingbird goes somewhere else, it brings the pollen to another flower. So if they are both benefiting, what is that? Mutualism. What is the difference between biotic and abiotic factors? There's one big difference. Tell me. Right, biotic means living and abiotic means non-living. That's it. And then what are limiting factors? Give me an example of a limiting factor that causes a carrying capacity to exist. Examples are mates, water, food, shelter, all things that we consider resources in general terms. Okay, so the thing you're going to do next is the exit ticket. Oh, actually, sorry, you're going to do your interactive journal first. Turn that in because it's due at the end of today. Then do your exit ticket. And then lastly, you're going to do your quiz. So you're going to follow the Google Classroom post instructions and take your quiz. There are only 5 questions on it, so make sure you take your time, read carefully, and double check your answers before you submit it, because once you submit it, you can't change your grade anymore. All right?